players are long since gone. Whether Nehru and Krishna Menon on the Indian side or Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai on the Chinese side, all that remains are various accounts of the only war India and China fought in 1962, and those fuzzy black and white images on YouTube of Indian soldiers on Himalayan ridgelines. "55 years on, as the shadow of the Chinese dragon darkens the skies over eastern India, it's clear that the Indian army which faced the Chinese onslaught then is not the same army today. Its officers and men are better trained and better equipped for the kind of punishment high altitude inflicts on soldiers and their equipment.
This is a far cry from 1962. Two senior army officers, Lieutenant General T.B. Henderson Brooks and Premendra Singh Bhagat, wrote an as-yet classified report on the India-China war. Now, part one of the report begins with a quote from Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu's The Art of War. It says, "Know yourself, know your enemy, 100 battles, 100 victories." The report blames the Indian army for its unsound military plan and the intelligence apparatus for assuming erroneously that China won't use force. It doesn't spare the political class either, holding it responsible for pressing the Indian army into combat without the necessary wherewithal.
This is a better army than ever before. Years of counter-insurgency operations has battle-hardened its men. Operational doctrines and concepts have been modified, changed and transformed, reflecting the specific challenges posed by adversaries, terrain and geography, and obviously climate. Weapons have changed from the simple .303 rifle, which was the standard rifle issued to army jawans in those days, to automatic weapons of every kind. They include anti-material rifles to target enemy bunkers, sniper rifles to light machine guns and heavy machine guns, light mountain artillery transportable by helicopter, unmanned aerial vehicles for reconnaissance, and sophisticated communications gear.
One of the major things that actually contributed to the damage that was done in 1962 was lack of communication setup. Because lack of communication actually made many of the commanders feel nervous at the lower levels. Those things have been taken care of. A number of exercises with the international armed forces has been done that has increased our experience and the exposure. In addition, as far as diplomacy-wise, India has arrived in the international scene, and they are as strong as anybody else in the diplomatic scene.
The India of 1962 was proud, had confidence, but it had not been tested. And then we were found wanting in 62. After that, I think with the passage of time, look, 70 years is not a long time in the history of a country. I mean, we're a 5,000-year plus civilization. But as a country, you're growing institutions, your armed forces have been tested, they are in the process of, they feel much more confident, resilient in the area of technology.
More important, the army does not stand alone. The Kargil War demonstrated the value of the Air Force operating jointly with the army. The Air Force fleet of Su-30 MKI bombers, Mirage MiG-29 fighters, and strategic airlifters like the C-17 and C-130 are a far cry from the gnats, hunters, caribous and packets of those days. Not to forget the Navy. Today's Indian Navy is a blue water navy, meaning it can carry out operations far from Indian shores. the Vikramaditya aircraft carrier, the nuclear-powered Arihant ballistic missile submarine and the nuclear-powered Akula attack submarine are the Navy's force multipliers. They can be used to interdict enemy shipping and cut the flow of vital energy supplies. Diplomatically, the war was a compelling reminder to India of the dangers of complacency, of not taking for granted the ill intentions of a neighbour. Politically, it was a reminder to our politicians of the danger of interfering in operational military matters.
The spectre of a two-front war with China and Pakistan always stares at India. But India of 2017 is different, says Defence Minister Arun Jaitley. Indian Army Chief General Bipin Rawat, for his part, says the Indian Army is fully prepared for a two-and-a-half-front war, suggesting that his army is prepared to deal internal and external fronts at the same time if it comes to that.
There are a number of things that have changed from 1962 onwards till 2017. One is that in 1962, there was the first major war that was fought by India. At that time, neither operationally nor logistically, we were ready for such an operation. Today, Indian Army is a well-experienced army, has been in combat a number of times after 1962, and the training, the equipment, the morale, everything is different from what it was from 1962.
All I'm saying is that it's a different India, a more confident India, an India wanting peace in its neighborhood, greater strategic content with the other big powers, and I feel very confident.
More important, our understanding of China has increased many-fold. While there are many views on what led to the 1962 war, it is acknowledged that China took recourse to war because the world was looking elsewhere. Let's examine this a little deeper. The US and the then Soviet Union were on the brink of nuclear war. This was triggered by the deployment of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. Cuba is little over 140 kilometers from the United States. For US President John F. Kennedy, this was unacceptable. He saw it as a grave danger to the US and imposed a quarantine on Cuba, deploying the powerful US Navy to stop any Soviet vessel heading for Cuba. The standoff lasted 13 days before the Soviets backed down and withdrew the missiles. But the crisis transfixed the world. Nobody paid much attention to the growing tensions between India and China. It was a reminder to India that it must intensify its engagement with the world, with its neighbors, and build friends and partners no matter where they may be.
Today, you are able to engage the other 192 countries in the world. In Latin America, in Africa. You are no longer engaging the rest of the world either through isms or through limited groupings. Look, the world has changed. Non-alignment, which is anchored in the independence of decision-making, in your ability to make independent choices, has evolved. We have excellent relations now with countries cutting across the ideological string. Not only with the erstwhile Soviet Union, with Russia, and I think that's a relationship which has a lot of content.
The 1962 war also triggered a rash of studies on China, because looking back, Beijing's decision to go to war may have been driven by domestic compulsions. The 1950s was a period of great political instability and economic turmoil. Chairman Mao's grand vision called for people to be reorganized into communes or collectives. It meant giving up ownership of land and property. This was not to everybody's liking. Mao's Great Leap Forward diverted people from farming to making iron and steel in crude backyard furnaces. The experiment failed. Food production fell, leading to widespread famine, where an estimated 20 million people died. Little of this was known to the outside world. This was because Communist China was a dictatorship. No dissent was tolerated. Nothing ever filtered out. Democratic India was an open book, its weaknesses known to the world. India's leadership was preoccupied with national development. Little money was being spent on defense, and frontier security remained Pakistan-focused.
Sun Tzu says to subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill. Sun Tzu also says, every battle is won or lost before it is ever fought. And China has sought to do just that by coercion, intimidation, or co-option at various times in its recent history to subjugate rivals who take a dim view of its so-called peaceful rise, be it China's maritime boundary in the South China Sea or its undemarcated land border with India. China has sought to first create facts on the ground and then present it as a fait accompli.
China's incremental occupation of Tibet in 1950 was known to the Indian leadership of that time, but they did little to stop it. Today, India's refusal to back down on the Doklam Plateau in Bhutan is a signal to Beijing and the world that this country will not compromise on its security and will stand by its friends and allies. When China recently demanded that the Dalai Lama not be allowed to visit Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh, India refused. On previous occasions, India was reluctant to annoy the Chinese. With the result, China has stepped up its incursions into Indian territory, issued stapled visas to people from Arunachal to show it is a part of China, and blatantly used Pakistan to undermine India. Clearly, India is in no mood to mollify the Chinese anymore. If the mandarins in Beijing believe that India is using the Dalai Lama to challenge China's control over Tibet, so be it. India has also learnt valuable lessons from China's record of stealthily building infrastructure in Indian territory and then claiming it as its own. In the 1950s, China began quietly building a 1,200-kilometer long highway connecting the province of Xinjiang with Lhasa in Tibet. 179 kilometers of this highway ran through the icy desert of Aksai Chin. The Chinese went ahead with the construction of the highway, even though the Simla Accord of 1914 put Aksai Chin within the borders of British India. Other records showed Aksai Chin as part of Jammu and Kashmir. There was even a Kashmir police outpost on the route of the Chinese highway. Kashmir government records showed Lanakla Pass in Ladakh. Indian police patrols used to go up to Lanakla until 1957. By 1958, they were being stopped by Chinese army units at Kongala Pass, claiming it was Chinese territory.
In the past, China did not shy away from employing levers from its diplomatic toolkit to bully India, which some say was met with characteristic Indian diffidence. But of late, India has revisited its China policy and signals intent not to adhere to its One China policy unless China reciprocally pursues a One India policy.
In the last about, I would say, 5 to 7 years, we have been very strong in conveying our apprehensions about what China is pursuing. And this is not the first time. If you take your mind back to 2013, we did take a position on the incident that happened in DBO. In 2014, we took a position on Chumar. In 2017, we have taken a position on Doklam. I am sure Chinese are observing all this. So are our neighbors observing all this. So India has been conveying and also standing up for what it feels is right. And that is also being watched by the international community. I think we are doing the right thing and we should continue to do so.
More lessons have been read in the years from 1959, which could well be described as China's long, slow steps to war. In January 1959, Zhou Enlai claimed 40,000 square kilometers of Indian territory in Ladakh and Arunachal. In August, China began beaming propaganda about liberating Ladakh, Sikkim and Bhutan. The same month, Chinese troops captured a military post in Longju in Arunachal's upper Subansiri district. In October, there was the infamous Kongala Pass incident when 10 Indian policemen were killed by Chinese troops. In February 1961, China claimed more territory in Ladakh and began aggressive and intrusive patrolling into India. The war itself has been closely studied for the tactics employed by the Chinese and what impact it had. In June 1962, there was a face-off between Indian and Chinese troops in the Galwan Valley in Ladakh. No shots were fired and the Chinese withdrew. In September, Chinese troops fired on an Indian post in Dola on the Thagla Ridge in Ladakh. On the 20th of October, the Chinese attacked all along the border from Ladakh to Arunachal. In Ladakh, the Chinese attacked Rezangla, defended by 120 men of the Kumaon regiment. Only 6 survived. The Chinese shelled Chushul airfield. In Arunachal, Tawang and Walong were overrun by Chinese forces. Today, as China tries to threaten and intimidate India into withdrawing from the Doklam Plateau, India is united, politically, diplomatically, and militarily. The nation is aware of the nature of the Mandarin, of his propensity to push and keep pushing until he gets what he wants. India has drawn a line in the high Himalayas and made it clear, thus far and no further.